John Mercer had not spoken a full sentence to another human in nearly 3 years. Out on the wide, wind-blown plains of New Mexico territory, his ranch sat lonely and weathered, just like the man himself. The locals in the nearby town of Dry Creek called him the Silent Bull, partly for his refusal to talk, partly for his stubborn strength. Since the tragic loss of his wife and newborn daughter to typhoid, John had withdrawn from the world, burying himself in routine. He worked from dawn until nightfall, maintaining fences, tending to his cattle, and nursing the land like it was the last thing tethering him to life. One evening, a storm rolled in from the north, sharp lightning slicing through thick clouds, thunder rumbling across the mesa like distant gunfire. As rain threatened to fall, John saddled his horse and rode out to the canyon fence line. Coyotes had been circling the cattle lately, and a section of barbed wire had snapped loose. He was determined to fix it before darkness swallowed the land. That's when he heard it, faint at first, but unmistakable. Sobbing Dot at first, he thought it might have been the wind whistling through the rocks, but then it came again, closer. A child's cry, thin and desperate. He froze, hand resting on the revolver holstered at his hip. No one lived out here. The nearest homestead was over 10 miles away. He scanned the rocky terrain, following the sound. Then he saw them. Huddled beneath the twisted limbs of a desert juniper tree were 3 small figures. They didn't run when he approached. They didn't speak. They just sat there, trembling. Rain began to fall in thick drops as John dismounted. As he stepped closer, he realized with a jolt of confusion that each of them, 2 boys and 1 girl, wore rough burlap sacks over their bodies with holes crudely torn out for their arms and feet. Their faces were completely covered, hidden beneath the stained, coarse material. "Who are you?" John asked, his voice rusty from disuse. No answer. Only the soft, shuddering cry of the girl. He knelt, holding out a weathered hand. "Where are your folks?" The eldest, the girl, finally turned toward him. Her voice was muffled through the sack, but the words were clear. "We'll be quiet if you remove our sacks." Something about her tone wasn't threatening. It was pleading. Like this request meant everything. John hesitated. He should have gone for the sheriff. He should have taken them to town. But something deeper than logic stirred inside him. That protective instinct he thought he'd buried along with his daughter began to pulse through his chest. With gentle hands, he removed the girl's sack. What he saw stunned him. Her face was thin but ethereal, her eyes wide and ash-gray, glinting strangely in the stormlight. Faint scars, no, symbols, curled along the side of her neck like an old brand. The 2 boys flinched as he removed their sacks next, revealing similar eyes, similar scars. They were filthy, barefoot, and clearly malnourished, but something about them felt otherworldly, not in a supernatural sense, but in the way tragedy ages a child beyond their years. "I'm Lena," the girl said. "These are my brothers, Tobias and Sammy. We ran. Ran from where?" John asked, voice low. "A place no one should live in," she replied. "They put the sacks on us to stop what we are." Rain fell harder. The sky split with light. John didn't understand, not fully. But he knew fear when he saw it. He knew desperation. Without another word, he led them back toward his ranch, the girl's hand clinging tightly to his coat. That night, John Mercer took in 3 strangers with no names beyond what they'd given him, and no idea that by removing their sacks, he'd just opened a door that could never be closed. John Mercer didn't sleep that night. The storm raged outside, wind howling through the eaves of his wooden ranch house, but it wasn't the weather that kept him awake. It was the presence of 3 strange children lying quietly in his barn, the same children who had appeared from nowhere, cloaked in burlap sacks, asking for their release. He lay in his bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what he'd seen. The scars on their necks, like symbols. the way they barely spoke, the look in their eyes like they'd seen too much for their age. At sunrise, John finally rose. He threw on his coat and headed to the barn, not sure what he'd find. To his surprise, all 3 children were already awake and working. Lena, the eldest, was sweeping out hay with a handmade broom. Tobias, maybe 9 years old, was gently brushing one of John's old horses, murmuring softly to it. And little Sammy, only about 5, was sitting cross-legged on the dirt floor, surrounded by curious mice that didn't run from him. They stopped when they saw John. Lena stood quickly, brushing dust off her patched dress. "We thought it would be better if we helped," she said. "You don't owe me work," John muttered, startled by their initiative. "We don't like feeling useless," Lena replied. John nodded slowly. He didn't want to pry too hard. Not yet, but he asked the basics, where they were from, if anyone was looking for them. Lena only answered, "We were passed around. Then we escaped. That's all I can say right now." Despite the unanswered questions, John couldn't bring himself to turn them away. They were quiet, polite, and oddly helpful. That day, they followed him around the ranch, assisting without complaint. Tobias helped repair a shed door with surprising skill for his age. Lena cooked eggs and beans that tasted better than John remembered food ever being. Even little Sammy seemed to calm the livestock just by sitting near them. By sundown, John found himself more at ease with them than he'd been with most adults, but the strangeness only deepened. His favorite Mare, a horse that usually snapped at strangers, allowed Lena to braid her mane. One of his sickly lambs, given up for dead just the day before, began standing again after Sammy touched its head and whispered softly. John wasn't superstitious, but something about these children didn't make sense. That night, as they sat quietly in the house John in his armchair, the children on a rug near the fire, Lena looked up and asked gently, "Do you want us to go?" John blinked. "No, I don't," she smiled. "Then we'll be quiet. We always are when we're safe." Outside, the wind had died down. The ranch felt unusually calm, almost serene. For the first time in years, John didn't feel that crushing silence of grief. Instead, he felt the presence of something still and strong, like healing. The next morning, something even stranger occurred. The old windmill, rusted and stuck for over a year, was spinning again. Not wildly, but smoothly, steadily. Its rhythmic creak filled the air like a long-forgotten lullaby. John had tried to fix it countless times, even considered replacing it. But now, it worked as if brand new. He looked toward the barn, where the children were just stepping out into the light, blinking up at the morning sun. Lena met his eyes and gave a small nod, not of guilt but of knowing. He didn't know what these children were hiding. He didn't understand how or why they'd come to him. But something told him that by bringing them in, he hadn't just saved them. He might have saved something inside himself too. And deep down, he felt the shift. These weren't just children of sorrow. They were children of change. In the weeks following the storm, John Mercer's ranch began to feel different, like it had come alive again. The children had quietly integrated into the daily routine. Lena, calm and composed, helped with cooking and house chores. Tobias, nimble and observant, assisted with livestock. And little Sammy, with his soft steps and even softer voice, often wandered among the trees, talking to birds and picking herbs with uncanny accuracy. John, once silent and withdrawn, began speaking more. "Not much, but enough. A thank you here. A be careful there." The children respected his quiet, and he respected their strange silence about the past. But the feeling that something unexplained was happening began to tug at his mind. It wasn't just the way the land responded to them, greener grass, steadier weather, but also how his dreams had changed. John started seeing visions at night, a dark building filled with the cries of children, firelight flickering against concrete walls, symbols scrawled across doors. And always a voice whispering they were meant to change the land, not be chained by it. He never told the children about these dreams. But one morning, as he poured coffee into tin mugs, Lena looked up and said quietly, "They're starting to reach you too." John froze. "What is?" "The memories," she replied. "Not yours, ours. Sometimes they travel when people are close to us." Before he could press her further, Tobias ran in with news. Someone was coming up the trail from Dry Creek. They all went to the porch to see. It was a man in black dust-covered coat, leather-bound Bible in hand, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. A traveling preacher. "Name's Brother Malden," he introduced himself, voice thick with southern drawl. "Mind if I speak a word with you, Rancher Mercer?" John, wary but polite, offered him a seat outside. The children remained inside, peeking out through the window. Brother Malden leaned in. "Word in town is you've taken in a few orphans. Odd ones, kids with a history. Some say they came from the old Fort Kildare project." John's jaw tightened. That name sounded familiar, an old decommissioned army site half a county away. Closed down years ago, rumored to have been used for secret experiments during the war. "They're just kids," John said firmly. Malden shook his head. "No, sir, they're marked. I've seen it before. Children bred and raised in darkness, molded by forces we don't understand. The sacks weren't rags, they were restraints, masks to suppress the unnatural." John stood. "You've said enough." The preacher rose, tipping his hat. "You think you're helping them, but the longer they stay here, the more this place will change. The land will start breathing. People will notice." With that, he left. John watched him ride off, unease growing in his chest. That night, the wind moaned across the plain like a warning. In the barn, Lena whispered stories to her brothers about the others who didn't survive, about the rooms filled with silence, about doctors with empty eyes. She didn't know John was listening from the shadows. Later, when the children were asleep, he walked the property. The stars above were unusually bright. The windmill creaked steadily. The cattle were calm. But the land didn't feel empty anymore. It felt awake. He looked toward the barn and whispered, almost to himself, "What are you?" And in the silence, though he heard no reply, he felt an answer settle deep in his bones. They were more than children. They were carriers of something ancient, something wounded but powerful. And they had chosen his land to heal. The morning after Brother Malden's visit, John Mercer knew something had changed. The preacher's warning echoed in his mind, but it wasn't fear that gnawed at him. It was the sense that he'd only scratched the surface of a much deeper truth. The way the land responded to the children, the windmill moving without explanation, the sick animals healing, it all pointed to something unnatural, or maybe something forgotten by nature itself. Later that day, John decided to stop waiting for answers and ask directly. He found Lena in the garden patch behind the barn, her hands deep in the earth, planting onions. Tobias and Sammy were nearby collecting wild herbs. John watched them for a moment, so peaceful, so focused. "Lena," he said softly. She looked up, squinting against the sun. "I need to know," he said. "What are you hiding?" Lena dusted off her hands and sat on a flat stone. She didn't resist, didn't deflect. Instead, she nodded slowly. "You deserve the truth, but it's not an easy one." John sat down beside her. She began. "We weren't born in a normal place. We were taken when we were babies from orphanages, back alleys, abandoned homes. Someone told our caretakers that we'd be given a better life. But we weren't. We were taken to a place called Camp Echo Underground, hidden near Fort Kildare." John felt his chest tighten. The name matched what Brother Malden had hinted at. "They didn't hurt us, not at first," Lena continued. "They studied us, measured our pulses, our reactions, our dreams. They tested how we responded to the land, to animals, to one another. Some of us, we could feel things others couldn't. Tobias can feel if something's broken, machines, bones, anything. Sammy feels pain before it happens. Me? I feel emotion like it's a sound in the air. John sat still, absorbing every word. It sounded impossible, but nothing about these children had ever felt ordinary. Lena pulled back the neckline of her shirt, showing him the strange swirling scar on her neck. This brand? It was how they tracked us. The sacks were part of the suppression. They blocked our senses, made it harder to hear the world. We were told it was to protect us, but it was really to control us. John clenched his fists. And the others? Not everyone survived, Lena said, voice trembling. Some went mad, others just faded. We escaped during a transport. There were more of us at first, but only we 3 made it out this far. John stared out at his land, at the waving grass and glinting fence posts. Why here? I don't know, Lena admitted. But we felt drawn. It was like something called us. And when you removed the sacks, everything started healing. John looked at her, truly seeing her now not just as a child, but as someone carrying a burden far too big for her small shoulders. You didn't ask for any of this. No, she said. We just want to be free. To be, but they'll come for us. They always do. John rose, a weight pressing on his chest, not just the truth of what the children had endured, but the realization of what protecting them meant. I won't let them take you, he said. You may not have a choice, Lena whispered. But thank you. That night, John cleaned his old rifle. He checked every lock on the doors and lit an extra lantern on the porch dot, not because he was scared, but because he had made a choice. He was no longer just a lonely rancher with ghosts of the past. He was a guardian now, of these children, of whatever strange power they carried. And whether it was science, magic, or something in between, he would stand between them and anyone who tried to cage them again. John Mercer didn't know how long the peace would last, but he knew it was fragile. After Lena revealed the truth about their escape from Camp Echo and the gifts they carried, John began preparing for the inevitable. He reinforced the barn doors, cleaned out the old root cellar in case they needed to hide, and kept his rifle loaded. Though the ranch still felt calm, heavier with meaning, perhaps there was a lingering chill beneath the warmth, a warning that something was coming. It came 3 days later, a dust cloud on the horizon. Not a storm, horses, 4 riders. They didn't wear military uniforms, but John recognized the type. Hardened men, carrying rifles and revolvers, faces cold and unreadable. Mercenaries, likely hired by the same people who had built Camp Echo. The lead man dismounted as soon as he reached the front gate. He was lean, tanned, and looked too clean for a cowboy. His boots were polished, and his shirt didn't carry a speck of trail dust. He walked right up to the porch where John stood, shotgun resting beside him. Mr. Mercer, the man said smoothly, name's Reddick. I believe you've taken in some children who don't belong to you. John's jaw tensed. They belong to no one. They're government property, Reddick replied. Highly sensitive and very dangerous. We're here to retrieve them. You can step aside and let this end quietly, or not. John stared at him, silent. Inside the house, Lena watched from behind a curtain. Sammy was trembling. Tobias held his hand. John finally spoke. You step foot on my land again, you'll leave with less than you came with. Reddick didn't smile. He just gave a short nod and backed off. You're making a mistake, old man. You don't know what they really are. As they rode off, John knew that wouldn't be the last of them. That night, he gathered the children and led them through a hidden path behind the barn, a narrow trail that wound into the hills and connected to a network of caves. Years ago, the Apache had used them. They'd been forgotten by most, but John knew every turn. Hide here if anything happens, he said. Don't come out unless I find you. But Lena looked up and shook her head. "We can't keep hiding, John. They won't stop. They'll burn your land to the ground. You gave us safety, but we need to stand, or we'll never be free." John didn't like it, but she was right. The next day, the men returned. But this time, they weren't asking. They came before dawn, approaching from the east with rifles drawn. John stood at the porch with his shotgun. The first shot rang out. John fired back, knocking one man off his horse. But before violence could escalate, Tobias ran into the open and knelt on the ground. John shouted, "No!" But then something incredible happened. Tobias touched the earth with both hands. The soil vibrated just slightly, and the men's weapons began to click and jam. One by one, their rifles misfired, bolts locking, barrels seizing up. Reddick screamed, demanding they fight, but the men hesitated. Then Lena stepped forward. Her voice, quiet and clear, spoke directly into their minds. Not commands, not threats, just memories, pain, suffering. The faces of the children they'd helped imprison, it broke something inside them. Sammy, small and fragile, held John's hand through it all. By the time the sun crested over the hill, the mercenaries were disarmed, shaken, and riding away in silence. Reddick didn't look back. John turned to Lena, stunned. "How did you?" "We're not meant to destroy," she said. "We're meant to wake things up, the land, people, hope." And as the wind carried their words across the quiet plains, John knew something fundamental had shifted, not just in them, but in him, in the land itself. The children weren't running anymore. They were beginning to stand. After the standoff with the mercenaries, something in the air around John Mercer's ranch shifted. The land didn't just feel awake anymore, it felt protected. The children had not used violence to defend themselves. Instead, they had used something deeper: empathy, memory, and connection. They didn't fight with fists or fire, they changed the hearts of men who came to harm them. And the world began to take notice. Word spread quietly at first. A few ranch hands from neighboring properties talked about strange lights seen at night above Mercer's land, soft hues of green and violet rippling through the sky, like northern lights. Farmers claimed their cattle strayed toward John's fences and came back healthier. A widow from town said she stopped by his ranch for help with a lame mule, and it walked again before sunset. Whispers turned into wonder. Some thought it was magic. Others called it a miracle. A few still muttered, "Curse." But no one could deny something strange and beautiful was happening on John's ranch. One morning, John received a letter delivered by hand, no envelope, no return address, just a folded note. "You've made it public. We will not return. The world will watch. Use the gift wisely." It was unsigned, but John knew it came from someone within the same program that once held Lena, Tobias, and Sammy. They weren't coming back, not because they had given up, but because they feared exposure. The children had become too visible now. Too many eyes were on them. With the threat gone, John did something he never expected. He filed adoption papers. It took some work, half-truths, back-channel help, a lawyer from Santa Fe willing to believe in miracles. But eventually, Lena, Tobias, and Sammy Mercer became a legal family. John had never imagined being a father again, not after the loss of his wife and daughter. But now he was. Not by blood, but by choice, by something stronger. Life on the ranch continued, but with purpose now. Lena started a small school under the cottonwood trees, teaching reading and writing to local children. Tobias built small devices that helped other ranchers fix their wells and fences machines that never broke down. Sammy planted wild herbs that healed sick animals and calmed nervous folk just by their scent. People began visiting from across the territory, not just neighbors, but strangers. Some came with broken animals. Others came with broken hearts. They didn't always leave healed, but they always left changed. And the land, it bloomed. Not just with crops or grass, but with peace. Coyotes no longer hunted the livestock. Birds nested near the house without fear. Even the air smelled sweeter. Years passed. Lena grew into a young woman with steady eyes and a voice that soothed even the angriest soul. Tobias became a quiet inventor, building things from scrap that seemed impossible. Sammy remained soft and gentle, but wise beyond his years. Together, they turned a forgotten ranch into a place people called Sanctuary Mesa. John grew older, but not bitter. His grief had been transformed, not erased, but softened by love. One warm evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, John sat on his porch while his children laughed in the distance. The windmill turned steadily in the golden light. He remembered the first night he met them, how they trembled in the rain, hidden under sacks, barely more than shadows. And he remembered the words Lena had spoken. "We'll be quiet if you remove our sacks." But they hadn't stayed quiet. They had spoken to the land, to the broken, to him, and their quiet had changed everything.